Picture this. December 9th, 1945. A battle-hardened four-star general who had crushed Nazi armies across Europe sits in the back of a limousine in Germany. Within minutes, a routine car accident will paralyze him from the neck down. 12 days later, he'll be dead. But here's what makes this story truly shocking. Many believe it was no accident at all. Was America's most aggressive and controversial general assassinated? And if so, why? Before we answer that question, we need to understand who George S. Patton really was. Because this man didn't just fight wars, he lived for them. He believed God himself had destined him for military greatness. He slapped soldiers in the face and nearly destroyed his career. He competed in the Olympics. He designed his own sword. And when Hitler launched his final desperate attack in World War II, Patton pulled off what many call the most brilliant military maneuver in American history. This is the story of a man who couldn't sit still, who believed he lived past lives as a warrior, and who died just when peace finally arrived. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about one of history's most fascinating commanders. Let's rewind to 1885. George Smith Patton, Jr. was born into wealth and privilege on November 11th in San Gabriel, California. But don't let that fool you into thinking he had an easy childhood. Young George faced a challenge that would have crushed most kids. He couldn't read or write properly until he was almost 12 years old. Historians now believe Patton suffered from dyslexia, though no one knew what that was back then. Can you imagine? The boy who would become one of America's greatest generals struggled to decode simple words on a page. But here's where Patton's story gets interesting. He didn't let it stop him. Instead, he became obsessed with listening to stories, especially tales of his ancestors who fought in the American Revolution and the Civil War. His paternal grandfather was Confederate Colonel George S. Patton Sr., killed at the Battle of Winchester. His great-uncle died at Pickett's charge during Gettysburg. These weren't just family legends. They were his blueprint for life. From the earliest age, George decided he would become a war hero, no matter what it took. The family wealth came from his mother's side. She was the daughter of Benjamin Davis Wilson, the second mayor of Los Angeles, a man who owned 128 acres in what's now San Marino, California. The Pattons lived on this estate called Lake Vineyard, surrounded by luxury. But George wasn't interested in comfort. He was interested in combat. At age 18, he enrolled at the Virginia Military Institute, but stayed only 1 year before transferring to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And here's where things get brutal. Patton's academic struggles continued. His first year was such a disaster that he failed mathematics and had to repeat the entire year. Imagine the humiliation for someone who dreamed of military greatness. But Patton found his calling in other areas. He excelled at military drills. He became cadet sergeant major during his junior year and cadet adjutant his senior year. He tried football but broke his arms. Yes, both arms, and had to quit. So he turned to fencing and track. And this is where destiny stepped in. In 1912, at age 26, Lieutenant Patton was selected to represent the United States in the first ever modern pentathlon at the Stockholm Olympics. This was a brand new event designed specifically for military officers, testing 5 skills a soldier might need in war: pistol shooting, fencing, swimming, equestrian riding, and cross-country running. Imagine a cavalry officer riding an unfamiliar horse through enemy territory, fighting off attackers with sword and pistol, swimming across a river, then running miles to deliver a message. That was the modern pentathlon. Patton competed against 42 athletes, mostly European military officers. He was the only American in the field. And let me tell you about the controversy that still echoes today, the bullet incident. During the shooting portion, while most competitors use light .22 caliber pistols, Patton insisted on using his Army-issued .38 caliber. Why? He felt it was more appropriate for a real soldier. But when the judges examined his target, they declared that one of his bullets had missed completely. Patton protested vehemently. He argued that his .38 made such large holes that his later bullets passed through the same holes, making it look like he'd missed. The judges didn't buy it. Had they ruled in his favor, Patton would likely have won a medal, breaking the Swedish dominance. Instead, He finished 5th overall, still impressive, but it haunted him. He pushed himself so hard during the competition that he needed assistance getting out of the pool after the swimming event. In the final cross-country run, he collapsed in a dead faint after crossing the finish line, having staggered the last 50 meters to take 3rd place. After the Olympics, Patton traveled to France to train with Adjutant Charles Clary, Europe's most famous master swordsman. There, he learned that stabbing was more lethal than slashing, a lesson dating back to Roman legions. This training would change his life. He designed the M1913 cavalry saber, still called the Patton Saber today, and became the Army's master of the sword, the chief instructor in saber combat. But Patton's real test was coming, and it would be written in blood. In 1915, along the Mexican border at Fort Bliss, Lieutenant Patton got his first taste of real combat. Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa was raiding American territory, and the U.S. Army sent an expedition to stop him. Patton became the personal aide to General John J. Pershing, a relationship that would define both their careers. During the Pancho Villa expedition, Patton led a motorized patrol, one of the first military actions using vehicles instead of horses. And here's where the legend began. On May 14, 1916, Patton and his men encounter Julio Cardenas, Villa's second-in-command, at a ranch. What happened next sounded like a Western movie. As Cardenas and his men tried to escape on horseback, Patton opened fire. He personally shot and killed Cardenas and 2 other men. Then, in a moment that defined his theatrical nature, Patton strapped the dead bodies across the hoods of his vehicles and drove back to headquarters like a hunter displaying his trophies. Newspapers called it the first American armored action, though they were just cars. Pershing was impressed. He promoted Patton to captain. But the real war was about to begin. When World War I erupted in 1917, Pershing took Patton with him to Europe as part of the American Expeditionary Forces. And here's where Patton saw the future of warfare: tanks. At the Battle of Cambrai in France, British tanks had broken through German lines for the first time in history. Patton immediately recognized that these metal beasts would revolutionize war. He became the first officer assigned to the new tank corps. Think about that. Patton was literally building America's armored forces from nothing. He established the American Tank School in Bourg, France, and personally trained hundreds of soldiers to pilot French Renault tanks. His energy was superhuman. His standards were brutal. His vision was clear. Tanks would win wars. On September 26, 1918, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, Patton led his tank battalion into combat. Finally, he was commanding men in real battle. And then he was shot. A bullet hit him in the upper thigh, and he went down. But even wounded, bleeding in a shell crater, Patton refused to be evacuated until he'd given his final orders to his men. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroism. The war ended weeks later. Patton had proven himself in combat, but peace left him restless and frustrated. For the next 2 decades, while most officers relaxed into comfortable assignments, Patton obsessed over tank warfare. He wrote articles about armor tactics. He studied German and Soviet tank developments. He argued with superiors who didn't understand mechanized warfare. He made enemies among traditionalists who believed cavalry charges would always have a place in modern war. In 1936, Patton suffered a serious accident while playing polo. He hit his head so hard that he blacked out for 2 days. Some historians believe this injury caused brain damage that would affect his judgment later in life. But Patton never slowed down. He earned a pilot's license, so he could observe tank maneuvers from the air. He led massive training exercises, moving 1,000 vehicles from Georgia, Florida, and back, just to test logistics. By 1940, as Hitler's panzer divisions blitzkrieged across Europe, the U.S. Army finally understood what Patton had been saying for years. He was promoted to brigadier general, then to major general, then given command of the 2nd Armored Division. His face appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Everyone knew his nickname, Old Blood and Guts. His men had a different interpretation. Yeah, our blood, his guts. But Patton didn't care what people thought. War was coming to America, and he was ready. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Patton's moment had arrived. When America entered World War II, Patton was given command of the Western Task Force for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. On November 8, 1942, his forces landed in Morocco. It was a baptism by fire, quite literally, as his troops had to fight Vichy French forces who were supposed to be neutral but were defending their territory. Patton's aggressive tactics quickly overwhelmed French resistance. Within 3 days, Morocco was secured. But this was just a warm-up. The real enemy was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, whose Afrika Korps had been terrorizing Allied forces across the Sahara. After a humiliating American defeat at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, where German forces inflicted over 6,000 U.S. casualties, Eisenhower needed someone to restore morale and discipline. He chose Patton. In March 1943, Patton took command of 2 corps, replacing a demoralized and defeated leadership. Patton's transformation of 2 corps was immediate and brutal. He enforced strict uniform codes. Even in the desert heat, soldiers had to wear helmets and ties. He fined officers $25 for not shaving. He demanded instant obedience. Soldiers hated him at first, but something changed. They started winning. Under Patton's leadership, 2 corps helped trap Axis forces in Tunisia. By May 1943, over 250,000 German and Italian troops surrendered. North Africa was won, but Patton wasn't satisfied. He wanted Sicily. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 turned into a personal race between Patton and British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Both men despised each other, and both wanted the glory of capturing Messina, the strategic prize at Sicily's northeastern tip. Montgomery was methodical and careful. Patton was speed and aggression personified. Against orders, or at least pushing the boundaries of his orders, Patton launched his 7th Army on a mad dash across Sicily. His troops covered ground at incredible speed, often outpacing their supply lines. Villages fell daily. German defenders retreated in confusion. And on August 17, 1943, Patton's troops entered Messina hours before Montgomery's forces arrived. Patton had won his race. He captured over 100,000 enemy soldiers. He was a hero. Newspapers celebrated him as America's answer to Rommel. And then everything fell apart. Because 3 weeks earlier, on August 3rd, something had happened that would nearly destroy Patton's career forever. Something that would be revealed to the public and cause a scandal that almost got him sent home in disgrace. Let me take you inside the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, Sicily, on August 3rd, 1943. General Patton was touring the facility, visiting wounded soldiers, something he did regularly to boost morale. He walked through the tent wards, speaking with men who'd been shot, burned, and blown apart. And then he saw Private Charles Cole. Cole was sitting on a stool, appearing physically unharmed. When Patton asked what was wrong with him, Cole replied that he was nervous and couldn't take the shelling anymore. According to witnesses, Patton immediately flared up. He called Cole an arrogant coward, slapped him across the face with his gloves, grabbed him by the collar, dragged him to the tent entrance, and literally kicked him out, shouting, "Don't admit this son of a bitch. You hear me, you gutless bastard? You're going back to the front." Hospital staff stood in shock. After Patton left, they examined Cole. He had a fever of 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit and was later diagnosed with malaria. But Patton didn't know that, or didn't care to find out. 7 days later, on August 10th, Patton did it again. At the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, he encountered Private Paul Bennett, a 21-year-old artilleryman from South Carolina. Bennett was shaking, dehydrated, exhausted. He'd just watched his best friend get severely wounded. When Patton asked what was wrong, Bennett mentioned his nerves and that he couldn't stand the shelling anymore. Patton exploded. He called Bennett a goddamn coward and a yellow son of a bitch. He screamed that Bennett should be lined up against a wall and shot. Then Patton drew his pistol, his famous ivory-handled pistol, and waved it in Bennett's face before slapping him twice, once knocking his helmet off. Medical staff had to physically intervene. Now here's what makes this truly complex. Patton genuinely believed these men were malingerers, cowards using battle fatigue as an excuse to escape combat while their brothers died on the front lines. He'd seen real warriors, men missing limbs, faces burned beyond recognition. And here were these apparently healthy soldiers claiming their nerves were shot. Patton didn't understand, or refused to understand, that psychological trauma was real. What we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was known then as shell shock or battle fatigue, and many commanders, including Patton, viewed it with suspicion. He believed showing weakness endangered morale, and gave other soldiers an excuse to quit. 2 days after the second incident, Patton issued a directive to his commanders. It has come to my attention that a very small number of soldiers are going to hospital on the pretext that they are nervously incapable of combat. Such men are cowards and bring discredit on the army and disgrace to their comrades. But Patton had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Several people witnessed both slapping incidents: doctors, nurses, other patients. Reports went up the chain of command. Within days, the story reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Patton's superior and the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. Some commanders thought Patton was boasting. Eisenhower knew better. He'd seen what Patton could do. "When can you attack?" Eisenhower asked. Patton replied, "The morning of December 22nd with 3 divisions." What happened next was one of the most remarkable military movements in American history. Patton had actually anticipated this possibility. Days before the meeting, he'd secretly ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for exactly the scenario. While other commanders were caught off guard, Patton was ready. Between December 19th and 22nd, Patton's Third Army executed what military historians call the Pivot of Bastogne. Over 133,000 soldiers, 62,000 vehicles, 11,000 tanks, and other armored vehicles moved over difficult winter roads, often driving with headlights on through blackout conditions because visibility was so poor. Combat engineers laid nearly 20,000 miles of communications wire. Supply units worked around the clock. And Patton? He was everywhere, riding in his Jeep through ice and snow, visiting Corps commanders, checking on traffic flow, solving problems in real time. In a letter to his wife Beatrice, he wrote that the staff of the Third Army, which consisted of myself and Sergeant Mims, visited 2 Corps and 5 division commanders. But there was one more thing Patton needed: better weather. The Battle of the Bulge was being fought in one of the worst winters in European memory. Snow blanketed everything. Temperatures were well below freezing, and clouds prevented Allied aircraft from providing air support. German forces had chosen this timing specifically because Allied air superiority would be neutralized. On December 8th, Patton called his Third Army chaplain, Colonel James H. O'Neill, and asked, "Do you have a good prayer for weather?" When O'Neill looked confused, Patton explained he needed clear skies so Allied planes could attack German forces. O'Neill wrote what became known as Patton's Prayer. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee, of thy great goodness, to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle." Between December 12th and 14th, Patton had 250,000 copies of his prayer printed and distributed to every soldier in the Third Army. Some historians view this as psychological manipulation. Others see genuine faith. Patton himself believed God would answer. On December 20th, Patton drove alone to a Catholic chapel in Luxembourg City, the Fondation Pescatori. Though he was Episcopalian, he knelt before the crucifix, removed his helmet, and prayed earnestly. What he prayed for, only he knew. That same day, the weather in the Ardennes began to clear. By December 23rd, Christmas Eve, the skies opened. Allied fighter bombers and medium bombers attacked German positions relentlessly. Patton would later promote O'Neill and award him the Bronze Star. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commanded the surrounded 101st Airborne Division and attached armored units. They were running out of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. German forces completely encircled them. On December 22nd, German commanders sent a surrender ultimatum. McAuliffe's response became legendary: "Nuts!" When the German officers who delivered the ultimatum looked confused, an American officer explained, "It means go to hell." Patton's 4th Armored Division fought through brutal German resistance, village by village, field by field. The advance was agonizing. For every mile gained, American tanks and soldiers paid in blood. But Patton kept pushing, kept demanding, kept threatening to relieve commanders who couldn't break through. On December 26th, at approximately 4:50 p.m., a Sherman tank named Cobra King from a 4th Armored Division crashed through German lines and made contact with the 101st Airborne positions. Bastogne was relieved. The siege was broken. But Patton wasn't finished. He kept attacking through January, determined to close the bulge entirely and trap as many German forces as possible. He was in a personal race with Montgomery, who was attacking from the north. On January 16, 1945, Patton's forces reached Houffalize, meeting Montgomery's troops and closing the bulge. The Battle of the Bulge cost the Third Army dearly. Between December 16, 1944 and January 28, 1945, Patton's forces suffered tens of thousands of casualties, but they'd helped defeat Germany's last major offensive, destroyed irreplaceable German reserves, and proved once again that when the Allies needed someone to attack, Patton delivered. In a letter to his son, Patton wrote, "Leadership is a thing that wins battles. I have it, but I'll be damned if I can define it. Probably it consists in knowing what you want to do and then doing it and getting mad if anyone steps in the way." The road to Germany was now open, and Patton would be first across the Rhine. After the Battle of the Bulge, Patton's Third Army rolled east across Germany with unstoppable momentum. By spring 1945, they were capturing territory faster than supply lines could keep up. German resistance was collapsing. Towns and cities surrendered daily. On March 22, 1945, Patton's forces crossed the Rhine River, Germany's last major natural barrier. But something was changing inside Patton. The war was ending, and he knew it. And for a man who believed he was born to fight, peace was a death sentence. On April 14, 1945, Patton was promoted to 4-star general, the permanent rank of full general. It was an honor, but the timing was bitter. Just weeks later, on May 8th, Germany surrendered. World War II in Europe was over. While other soldiers celebrated, Patton was devastated. He wrote in his diary, "Yet another war has come to an end, and with it my usefulness to the world." Think about that. The war was won. Tens of millions of lives were saved. Nazi Germany was defeated. And Patton felt his life was over because there was no one left to fight. Eisenhower appointed Patton as the military governor of Bavaria, a position that required political sensitivity, administrative skill, and diplomatic tact. 3 things Patton completely lacked. Almost immediately, he created controversy. The U.S. policy was denazification, removing all former Nazi party members from positions of authority. But Patton argued this was impractical. He pointed out that most teachers, engineers, administrators, and skilled workers had joined the Nazi Party because membership was often mandatory for employment. He said, and this is a direct quote that destroyed him, membership in the Nazi Party was no different than being a Republican or Democrat in America. The statement caused outrage. American soldiers had just fought and died to defeat Nazism, and here was Patton comparing Nazi Party membership to normal political affiliation. Jewish organizations and veterans groups demanded his removal. Newspaper editorials condemned him. Eisenhower had no choice. On October 2, 1945, Eisenhower relieved Patton of command. The official reason was inappropriateness of statements made to the press. Patton was assigned to command the 15th Army, basically a headquarters staff documenting the war's history. For a combat general like Patton, it was a humiliating demotion. But there was something else happening to Patton. His behavior became increasingly erratic and bizarre. He made inflammatory statements about the Soviet Union, saying America should immediately attack Russia while they were weak. He claimed the U.S. had fought the wrong enemy and should have allied with Germany against the Soviets. These weren't just controversial opinions. They were potentially dangerous political statements from an active duty general. Some biographers believe Patton was suffering from undiagnosed brain damage. He'd had numerous head injuries throughout his life, horse accidents, polo injuries, car crashes. In 1936, he'd been knocked unconscious for 2 days. In 1945, he had at least 3 near-miss car accidents in Germany before the fatal one. Carlo D'Este, one of Patton's most respected biographers, wrote, "It seems virtually inevitable that Patton experienced some type of brain damage from too many head injuries. Others suggest he was simply a warrior who couldn't adapt to peace. Without a war to fight, without enemies to crush, Patton became lost." He'd once said, "Compared to war, all other forms of human endeavor shrink to insignificance." But there are also darker theories. Some believe Patton's anti-Soviet rhetoric made him dangerous to certain American and Soviet interests. He was openly advocating for war with Russia at a time when both superpowers were trying to establish a new world order. Some conspiracy theorists claim he was targeted for assassination. On December 9th, 1945, Patton accepted an invitation to go pheasant hunting near his headquarters. His regular driver, Sergeant Mims, was in the hospital, so a substitute driver, 19-year-old Private Horace Woodring, was at the wheel. Also in the car was Patton's chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay. Here's where the story gets interesting. Originally, Patton was sitting in the front passenger seat, but when he saw that the hunting guide's dog was riding in an open Jeep in the cold, Patton, in a characteristic act of kindness toward animals, stopped the convoy, had the dog move to the front seat of the warm Cadillac, and moved himself to the back seat. They were traveling near Mannheim, Germany, on an industrial road. As they approached the quartermaster depot, a U.S. Army truck suddenly turned left across their path. Woodring couldn't avoid it. The vehicles collided at relatively low speed. Some accounts say 30 to 35 miles per hour. The truck driver and Woodring were shaken but unharmed. General Gay was fine, but Patton had been thrown forward and hit his head on a glass or metal partition behind the driver's seat. He immediately realized he couldn't move. He said to Gay, "Work my fingers, Hap." When Gay squeezed Patton's fingers, Patton couldn't feel anything. "I'm paralyzed," he said. Now here's where the mystery deepens. Despite being the only injured person in a low-speed collision, Patton had suffered catastrophic damage, a compression fracture and dislocation of his cervical vertebrae, with severe spinal cord injury. He was completely paralyzed from the neck down. He was rushed to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg. For the first few days, doctors were cautiously optimistic. Patton could speak. His mind was clear. He joked with staff, saying, "Relax, gentlemen, I'm in no condition to be a terror now." His wife Beatrice flew from Boston to be with him. But Patton knew, when doctors told him he'd never walk again, never ride a horse, never lead a normal life, he reportedly said, "This is a hell of a way to die." For 12 days he lingered. Then, on December 21st, 1945, at 5:55 p.m., General George S. Patton Jr. died in his sleep. The official cause was pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. He was 60 years old. Just 12 days earlier, he'd been healthy, active, commanding an army. Now he was dead. But questions remain. Why did the truck turn directly into Patton's path? Some witnesses said the truck driver, Technical Sergeant Robert Thompson, seemed dazed or confused after the accident. Thompson was never charged with any violation. The accident report was remarkably brief, less detailed than typical fender benders. Years later, conspiracy theories emerged. In 2008, a book called Target, Patton by Robert Wilcox, claimed that OSS, Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, operative Douglas Bazata, admitted at a 1979 dinner that he'd been ordered to kill Patton. Bazata allegedly said he'd arranged the car accident, but that Patton survived, so the assassination was completed in the hospital. Most historians dismiss these theories. The evidence is circumstantial at best. Medical records show Patton died from complications consistent with his spinal injury. But the timing is undeniably suspicious. A healthy general dies in a minor car accident just after being relieved of command, and just as he was scheduled to return to the United States, where he would have been free to speak publicly about his controversial political views. Whatever the truth, Patton was buried in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of his Third Army who died in the Battle of the Bulge. His wife Beatrice had him interred there rather than bringing him home to the United States. She said he'd want to be with his men. His grave is marked by a simple white cross, identical to all the other crosses, except as faces of troops while there's face away, the commander forever leading his soldiers. So, what do we make of George S. Patton? Was he a brilliant commander or a brutal tyrant? A military genius or a deeply flawed man whose violence and aggression served a time and place, but nothing more? The numbers speak for themselves. During World War II, Patton's Third Army covered more ground, captured more enemy soldiers, and inflicted more casualties on the enemy than any other Allied army in Europe. They advanced 600 miles through France in just 1 month. They relieved Bastogne against impossible odds. They crossed the Rhine ahead of everyone else. From August 1944 to May 1945, the Third Army liberated or conquered over 82,000 square miles of territory. But those victories came at a cost, not just to the enemy, but to Patton's own soldiers. His relentless pace resulted in higher casualties than more cautious commanders. His discipline was harsh. His language was profane. His understanding of psychological trauma was non-existent. The slapping incidents revealed a man who valued aggression over compassion, results over humanity. And yet, many of his soldiers loved him. They complained about him constantly, about the uniform requirements, the discipline, the impossible demands. But they knew that under Patton they won. And in war, winning means surviving. General Omar Bradley, Patton's former subordinate who eventually commanded him, wrote, "Patton could have fought Hannibal, Caesar, or Napoleon and held his own." Eisenhower, despite their conflicts, said Patton was indispensable to the war effort. Even German generals respected him. After the war, several admitted Patton was the Allied commander they feared most. But Patton's worldview was also deeply problematic. His anti-Soviet rhetoric in 1945 wasn't strategic analysis. It was warmongering. His comparisons of Nazi party membership to American political parties showed stunning insensitivity. His treatment of soldiers with PTSD was cruel and medically ignorant. Patton believed in reincarnation and past lives. He was convinced he'd fought as a Greek soldier, as a Roman legionnaire, with Napoleon's armies in the 100 Years' War. He wrote poetry about his past life memories. Whether this was genuine mysticism or egotistical fantasy is impossible to know, but it shaped how he saw himself, as a warrior eternal, destined by fate to fight in every age. In one of his most famous poems, he wrote, "So as through a glass and darkly the age-long strife I see where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me." Perhaps that's the key to understanding Patton. He wasn't fighting just Germans or Japanese. He was fighting his own mortality, his own insignificance, the terrifying possibility that he might die without glory, without purpose, without the war that gave his life meaning. When peace arrived, Patton had no place in the world. He couldn't be a diplomat. He couldn't be a politician. He couldn't sit behind a desk writing reports. He was a weapon designed for war, and when the war ended, what was left? In his final months, Patton seemed to know his time was ending. He told friends he expected to die soon. He arranged his personal affairs. He visited battlefields from World War I, standing in the same places he'd fought 27 years earlier. It's almost as if he was saying goodbye. And then came the accident that killed him. Or was it an accident? We'll probably never know for certain. But perhaps it doesn't matter. Whether Patton died by chance, by conspiracy, or by the universe's dark sense of irony, the result is the same. The warrior who believed he'd lived and fought through the ages died in peacetime, in a car accident, paralyzed and helpless. There's a tragic poetry to it. The man who lived for combat, who designed sabers and led cavalry charges, who commanded tanks across continents, died unable to move, unable to fight, unable even to hold a weapon. Everything that defined him was taken away in an instant, but his legacy lives on. The M47 Patton tank was named in his honor. Military academies study his campaigns. His famous ivory-handled pistols are displayed in museums. The movie Patton, starring George C. Scott, won 7 Academy Awards and introduced him to millions who weren't born until decades after his death. More importantly, Patton changed how America fights wars. His emphasis on speed, aggressive maneuver warfare, combined arms tactics, and relentless offensive pressure became the foundation of U.S. military doctrine. When American tanks blitzed through Iraq in 1991 and 2003, they were executing Patton's principles, refined and modernized, but fundamentally his vision of how armored forces should be used. Yet for all his military genius, Patton failed at something more fundamental: being human. He couldn't understand that courage isn't just charging into battle. Sometimes courage is admitting you're broken. Sometimes courage is asking for help. The soldiers he slapped weren't cowards. They were casualties of a different kind of wound, one Patton couldn't see and refused to acknowledge. In the end, perhaps Patton's greatest tragedy wasn't his death, but his inability to imagine a life worth living without war. He once said, "Battle is the most magnificent competition in which a human being can indulge. It brings out all that is best. It removes all that is base." But that's not true, is it? Battle brings out extremes, both heroism and horror, both sacrifice and savagery. The best of humanity isn't found in war. It's found in peace, in creation, in love, in building rather than destroying. Patton never learned that lesson. And maybe that's why he had to die when the guns fell silent. Before we end, let's return to where we started. That car accident on December 9th, 1945. Because the more you examine the details, the stranger the story becomes. Consider these facts. First, the truck that hit Patton's car was driven by Technical Sergeant Robert Thompson, who was transporting a work detail. According to witnesses, Thompson turned left across Patton's lane without warning or apparent reason. He claimed he didn't see the approaching Cadillac, despite it being a clear day on a straight road. Second, no photographs were taken at the accident scene. Highly unusual for a collision involving such a prominent figure. The military police report was perfunctory and incomplete. Key details that would normally be documented were missing. Third, Patton's regular driver, Sergeant Mims, who'd driven him safely through combat zones across Europe, just happened to be in the hospital that day. The replacement driver, Private Woodring, had limited experience driving Patton. Fourth, if Patton had remained in the front passenger seat as planned, he would likely have been uninjured or only slightly hurt. But his compassionate decision to move to the back seat to give the hunting dog a warm place put him in the exact position to hit the partition. Fifth, within hours of Patton's injury, before his death was certain, Army officials began making arrangements that suggested they expected him to die. His wife Beatrice later said she felt rushed and pressured about funeral decisions while Patton was still alive. 6. Douglas Bozzatta's alleged confession in 1979, claiming he was ordered by OSS Director Wild Bill Donovan to eliminate Patton, has never been verified. But Bozzatta was a real OSS operative, and he didn't know people in positions to arrange such an operation. His claim that Patton was shot with a low-velocity projectile during the accident, causing paralysis, while medically questionable, has never been definitively disproven. Finally, there's a geopolitical context. In December 1945, the United States and Soviet Union were beginning what would become the Cold War. Patton's increasingly vocal advocacy for immediate war with the USSR was potentially explosive. Stalin himself knew who Patton was. Soviet intelligence had extensive files on all senior Allied commanders. Would Stalin have ordered Patton's assassination? Would American intelligence have eliminated one of their own generals to preserve the fragile peace? Most historians believe the accident was exactly what it appeared to be, a tragic collision that killed a great, but deeply flawed, military commander. The conspiracy theories, they argue, are the result of people unable to accept that someone as dynamic as Patton could die in such a mundane way. But here's what we know for certain. George S. Patton died just as peace arrived. The warrior who believed he was destined for eternal combat never got to return home, never got to enjoy victory, never got to see the world he'd fought to save. Instead, he died paralyzed, helpless, and perhaps wondering if his entire life had meaning once the shooting stopped. Was he assassinated, or was it simply a cruel twist of fate? We may never know, but perhaps the question itself reveals something about Patton. He was the kind of man whose life and death generate conspiracy theories, because people can't believe someone so larger than life could die so ordinary a death. In that sense, even the mystery surrounding his death is part of his legend. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Was George S. Patton a hero or a villain? He was undeniably one of the greatest battlefield commanders in American history. His aggressive tactics, his understanding of armored warfare, his ability to inspire and drive men to accomplish impossible missions. These things are historical fact. Without Patton, World War II would have lasted longer and cost more lives. But he was also cruel, arrogant, and psychologically abusive. He called traumatized soldiers cowards and struck them in front of their peers. He made racist and anti-Semitic remarks. His post-war comments about Nazis and Soviets were dangerous and inflammatory. He valued violence and aggression above almost everything else. Perhaps the truth is that Patton was both. Perhaps he was exactly the right man for World War II, a war that demanded ruthless aggression and total commitment to victory, but would have been the wrong man for almost any other time in history. The world needed George Patton in 1944, when Nazi Germany controlled Europe and needed to be crushed without mercy or hesitation. But the world didn't need him in 1945, when the future required diplomacy, patience, and the ability to build peace rather than wage war. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Patton's greatest strength, his absolute commitment to combat, was also his fatal weakness. He couldn't exist without war. And when war ended, so did he? What do you think? Was Patton assassinated? Or did he simply die in a freak accident? Was he a military genius we should honor, or a brutal commander whose methods shouldn't be celebrated? And here's the biggest question. If another war came tomorrow, will we want someone like Patton leading us, or have we evolved beyond needing men like him? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into one of history's most controversial figures fascinating, subscribe to the channel. We explore the complicated, messy, incredible true stories of history's most interesting people. Not just the sanitized versions you learn in school, but the real, complex, contradictory human beings who shaped our world. Hit that notification bell, because next time we're diving into another figure whose life was even more unbelievable than fiction. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, history isn't simple. People aren't simple. And sometimes the most interesting question isn't whether someone was good or evil, but why they were both at the same time. Thanks for listening.